Dear friends, after a tiring and stressful day, welcome to Mystic Sleep Tales. Tonight we embark on a very special long journey. We will travel along the most legendary highway in American history, a strip of asphalt and dreams that once stretched from the heart of Chicago to the sunny beaches of Santa Monica in California. This is Route 66, the highway that every person on Earth has dreamed of completing at least once. A highway that for 30 years carried millions of dreamers, adventurers, families, and fortune seekers across the vastness of American land. But tonight we are not just talking about road. We're talking about the places lined up along this road, the small, family-run motels and hotels that, like beads on a necklace, wrapped Route 66 around, promising weary travelers a clean bed, a warm shower, and a moment of rest before continuing their journey, their neon signs illuminating the desert darkness. Many of these motels are gone now, demolished and forgotten, victims of progress and the interstate highway system that rendered Route 66 obsolete. But some still stand. Some still stand, their old signs gleaming against the night sky, their rooms continuing to welcome guests as they have for 60, 70, even 80 years. These survivors are more than just places to sleep. They are time capsules, monuments to a bygone era, witnesses to countless American stories of hope and heartbreak, adventure and loss. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, let's take you on a journey along Route 66, exploring motels filled with neon signs and secrets. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the hum of the highway transport you back to a time when America traveled slower, saw more, and stayed in these magical little roadside establishments that brought new faces, new stories, and new dreams every night at sea. Part 1. The Birth of the Mother Road. To understand the motels of Route 66, we must first understand the road itself. And to understand the road, we need to go back to the 1920s, to an America that was falling deeply, madly in love with the automobile. The Ford Model T had democratized car ownership. What had once been a luxury for the wealthy was now accessible to middle-class Americans. Suddenly, ordinary people owned cars, and they wanted to use them. They wanted to visit relatives in the next state, to see the Grand Canyon, to drive to California, where the weather was warm and jobs were plentiful. But there was a problem, and it was a big one. The roads were terrible. In the early 20th century, American roads were a chaotic patchwork. Some were paved, most weren't. Some were maintained by local authorities, others weren't maintained at all. There was no coordination between states, no standardized system of route numbering, no way to reliably plan a long-distance journey. You could set out from Chicago hoping to reach Los Angeles, and you might make it, or you might get hopelessly lost, stuck in mud, or stranded in some small town when your car broke down on roads it was never designed to handle. But visionaries saw the potential. Men like Cyrus Avery, a Tulsa businessman who understood that America needed highways, not just for commerce and military defense, but for the human spirit. Avery believed passionately that Americans deserved the freedom to explore their own vast, beautiful country. He believed in the romance of the open road. In 1925, the federal government created the U.S. highway system, bringing order to the chaos of American roads. Highways would be numbered consistently across state lines. They would be marked with distinctive shield-shaped signs. They would be maintained to certain standards. It was revolutionary, the beginning of modern American mobility. Cyrus Avery served on the committee that decided which routes would be designated as U.S. highways, and he had a vision for the most important route of all. He imagined a highway connecting Chicago to Los Angeles, passing through the American heartland, through 8 states and dozens of small towns, carrying traffic and prosperity across the middle of the country. On November 11th, 1926, that vision became reality when Route 66 was officially designated. The route covered 2,448 miles, crossing Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. It wasn't the shortest route between Chicago and Los Angeles, but it passed through territory that Avery and other boosters believed needed development and connection to the broader American economy. In 1926, calling Route 66 a highway was generous. Much of it was unpaved dirt roads, sometimes barely more than wagon trails. Travelers faced mud in wet weather, dust in dry weather, and the constant possibility of getting lost because signage was inconsistent and maps were unreliable. But work began immediately to improve the route, to pave it properly, to make it worthy of its designation as a U.S. highway. Through the late 1920s and early 1930s, construction crews worked to transform Route 66. They paved dirt roads with asphalt and concrete. They built bridges over rivers and creeks. They carved paths through mountains and across deserts. The work was backbreaking, dangerous, and slow, but gradually the highway took shape, becoming a real, functional transportation corridor. By 1937, Route 66 was completely paved from end to end, one of the first fully paved cross-country highways in America. This was an enormous achievement, a triumph of engineering and determination. Americans could now drive from Chicago to Los Angeles on paved roads the entire way, a journey that would have been unthinkable just 15 years earlier. The timing was significant. Route 66 came of age during the Great Depression, when it served as an escape route for thousands of Dust Bowl refugees. John Steinbeck immortalized this migration in The Grapes of Wrath, calling Route 66 the Mother Road, the road of flight. Families fleeing drought and poverty in Oklahoma and Texas packed everything they owned into battered trucks and headed west on Route 66, hoping to find work and a new life in California. During World War II, Route 66 became a military corridor, connecting bases and defense plants, carrying convoys of trucks loaded with equipment and soldiers. The war brought development and traffic to the highway, setting the stage for its golden age. That golden age began after the war ended in 1945. Returning soldiers started families, bought houses in new suburbs, and most importantly for our story, they bought cars. The post-war economic boom created a prosperous middle class with money to spend and time to travel. Americans wanted to see their country, and they wanted to do it by car. Through the 1950s and into the 1960s, Route 66 thrived. Thousands of travelers drove it every day. Families on vacation, truckers hauling freight, salesmen making their rounds, young people heading west to chase California dreams. The highway was alive with movement, with possibility, with the distinctive optimism of mid-century America. And all these travelers needed places to stay. In the early days of automobile travel, options were limited. You could camp by the roadside, which many did. You could seek out a boarding house in town, if one would accept transient guests. Or you could stay in a downtown hotel, if you could afford it and didn't mind navigating unfamiliar city streets after a long day of driving. But entrepreneurs saw an opportunity. They recognized that travelers wanted something different. They wanted convenience, the ability to pull right off the highway and check in quickly. They wanted affordability, prices that middle-class families could manage. They wanted to park their cars right outside their rooms where they could keep an eye on them. They wanted a new kind of accommodation designed specifically for the automobile age. Thus was born the motor court, and later the motel, a portmanteau of motor hotel that perfectly captured what these establishments offered. The concept exploded along Route 66, starting in the 1930s and reaching full flower in the post-war era. Early motor courts were simple: a series of small cabins or a row of connected rooms, all facing a parking area. The architecture was unpretentious but often charming, incorporating regional styles. In the Southwest, motor courts might feature Pueblo Revival or Spanish colonial elements, stucco walls, and red tile roofs. In the Midwest, they might echo farmhouse design with pitched roofs and wood siding. What these places lacked in luxury, they made up for in personality and hospitality. Motor courts were almost always family-run. The owners lived on the property, often in a house attached to the office. They knew their guests, at least for the night. They recommended restaurants, provided road advice, and generally served as informal ambassadors for their communities. As Route 66 flourished through the 1950s, motor courts evolved and multiplied. Competition drove innovation. Amenities improved steadily. Early motor courts might offer nothing more than a bed and maybe a shared bathroom. By the 1950s, private bathrooms were standard, and motor courts were adding air conditioning, televisions, telephones, and swimming pools. But amenities alone weren't enough. At 50 or 60 miles per hour, travelers needed to notice your motel quickly. This need for visibility gave birth to one of the most iconic elements of Route 66 culture, the neon sign. Neon signs reached their artistic peak in mid-century America, and nowhere more so than along Route 66. Motel owners commissioned spectacular signs, elaborate creations of bent glass tubing filled with glowing gas, flashing lights, and eye-catching designs. These signs weren't just advertisements. They were folk art, expressions of optimism and creativity rendered in light. A great motel sign needed to be visible from far away, bright enough to catch attention even in harsh desert sunlight or the darkness of night. It needed to communicate essential information quickly: the motel's name, whether there was vacancy, what amenities were offered. And ideally, it needed to be memorable, distinctive enough that travelers would recognize it and remember it. Sign makers rose to the challenge with spectacular results. They created signs shaped like arrows pointing travelers off the highway. Signs with moving elements, with lights that chased around borders or blinked in patterns. Signs incorporating imagery, teepees and wigwams, cowboys and covered wagons, stars and moons and atomic starbursts. Each sign reflected the personality of the motel and the dreams of its owners. The motels themselves became increasingly elaborate and themed. Why stay in a standard room when you could sleep in a concrete teepee shaped like a wigwam? Why choose ordinary when you could have extraordinary? This impulse gave rise to some of Route 66's most beloved establishments. The Wigwam Village Motels offered guests the chance to sleep in teepee-shaped structures. These weren't authentic Native American dwellings, of course. They were tourist kitsch, pop culture fantasies rendered in reinforced concrete. But they were charming, whimsical, fun, and travelers loved them. Other motels leaned into regional themes. Spanish colonial revival architecture dominated the Southwest, with white stucco walls, red tile roofs, and arched doorways evoking romantic visions of old California. Modernist motels featured swooping rooflines and walls of glass, selling a vision of a sleek, comfortable future where travel was easy and every amenity was at hand. Underneath all the variety, Route 66 motels shared common characteristics. They were independent, not chains. They were family-run, with owners who took personal pride in their properties. They were affordable, designed for middle-class families. And they were optimistic, built on the belief that the highway would continue bringing travelers forever. For a while, it seemed like they might be right. Through the 1950s, Route 66 was at its peak, carrying not just travelers but American culture itself. It appeared in Bobby Troupe's famous song, Get Your Kicks on Route 66. It was featured in the television series that followed two young men in a Corvette having adventures. It showed up in literature, art, and the collective imagination. The motels weren't just places to sleep. They were stages where American life played out. Families on vacation, honeymooners spending their first nights together, salesmen writing up orders, truckers grabbing a few hours of rest. The motels were democratic spaces, open to anyone with the price of a room, places where different kinds of Americans mixed. Of course, this democratic ideal had limits. During the era of segregation, many motels refused service to African American travelers, forcing black motorists to plan their routes carefully using resources like the Green Book. This shameful reality was part of Route 60's success story, a reminder that the freedom of the open road wasn't equally available to everyone. But for those who could access it, Route 66 represented freedom, possibility, connection, and adventure. The motels were essential to that experience. They were where you rested between days of driving, where you swam while your parents unloaded the car, where you fell asleep to the sound of trucks passing on the highway outside. Even at Route 60 SIX's peak, change was coming. The federal government was planning a new interstate highway system that would bypass the old roads, including Route 66. These interstates would be faster, safer, more efficient, with multiple lanes and controlled access. They would also kill Route 66. The first section of Interstate 40, which would replace much of Route 66, opened in 1957. Over the next 3 decades, the interstate gradually paralleled and then replaced Route 66. As each new section opened, traffic on Route 66 declined. By 1985, when Route 66 was officially decommissioned, much of it was already bypassed and forgotten. Towns withered, gas stations closed, restaurants shuttered, and motels, those optimistic enterprises built on endless travelers, went dark. But not all of them. Some survived, and then something unexpected happened. Route 66 began to come back, not as a functional highway, but as something perhaps more valuable. A symbol, an icon, a piece of American history worth preserving and celebrating. Part 2. The Blue Swallow, a motel that refused to die. Among all the motels that line Route 66, one stands above the rest as the most photographed, most beloved, most iconic motorcourt on the Mother Road. The Blue Swallow Motel in Tucumcari, New Mexico, with its graceful neon swallow bird and classic promise of 100% refrigerated air, has become a symbol of everything Route 66 represents. The Blue Swallow story begins in 1939, when a carpenter named W.A. Huggins purchased a lot on Route 66 in Tucumcari and built a motor court. He called it the Blue Swallow Court, following the convention of the time when these establishments were known as motor courts rather than motels. Huggins' establishment was modest, 13 rooms arranged in an L shape around a parking area. Each room had its own attached garage bay, allowing guests to park undercover, a luxury that protected vehicles from the harsh New Mexico weather and gave travelers peace of mind about their cars. The Blue Swallow changed hands several times in its early years, with each owner making improvements and additions. But the motel's golden age truly began in 1958, when a remarkable woman named Lillian Redman became its owner. Lillian, born in 1907, had lived an adventurous life. In 1915, at just 8 years old, she had traveled west to work as a Harvey girl, one of the young women employed by Fred Harvey to work as waitresses in restaurants and hotels across the West. This was groundbreaking for the time, offering young women from the East a chance to earn money, see the country, and experience independence. Lillian's time as a Harvey girl ended when she married Floyd Redman. In 1958, Floyd bought the Blue Swallow as an engagement present for Lillian. It was a romantic gesture and a business opportunity, a chance for them to build a life together. The Redmans made the Blue Swallow their life's work. They installed the iconic neon sign that still glows today, a masterpiece of neon art featuring that graceful bluebird. They officially changed the name from Blue Swallow Court to Blue Swallow Motel, adopting the term that was becoming standard in the industry. Floyd and Lillian had a philosophy about running a motel that set them apart. They believed in treating every guest as a friend, in maintaining their property to the highest standards, and in providing genuine hospitality. This wasn't just a business transaction to them. It was a calling. When Floyd died in 1973, Lillian faced a choice. She could sell the motel and retire, or she could continue alone. She chose to continue, and for the next 25 years, she was the heart and soul of the Blue Swallow. Lillian's dedication was extraordinary. She cleaned every room herself, refusing to accept anything less than perfection. She tended the flowers around the property. She greeted every guest personally, often staying up late to accommodate travelers arriving after midnight. She knew her regular customers by name, remembered their preferences, asked about their families. I end up traveling the highway in my heart with whoever stops here for the night, Lillian once said, and this beautiful sentiment captured her approach perfectly. She understood that the motel wasn't just her home and business. It was a way station on other people's journeys, and she took seriously the responsibility of making those journeys better. The Blue Swallow thrived under Lillian's care through the 1960s, but then came the challenge that would test every Route 66 business, the interstate. When Interstate 40 bypassed Tucumcari in the late 1960s, traffic on Route 66 plummeted virtually overnight. For most motels, this was a death sentence. Occupancy rates collapsed. Revenues dried up. Owners closed their doors, unable to compete with newer motels at interstate exits. But Lillian refused to give up. When Route 66 was closed to the majority of traffic and the other highway came in, I felt just like I had lost an old friend, she said. But some of us stuck it out and are still here on Route 66. Lillian's survival strategy was simple: excellence. While other motels let their properties deteriorate, cutting costs to stay afloat, Lillian maintained the Blue Swallow as immaculately as ever. She kept her rates affordable, but never compromised on cleanliness or hospitality. She understood that if she could provide a superior experience, some travelers would seek her out specifically, even if it meant detouring from the interstate. She was right. Through the dark years of the 1970s and 80s, the Blue Swallow survived on a combination of loyal local customers, travelers who remembered it from earlier trips, and a growing trickle of Route 66 enthusiasts who were beginning to seek out authentic motor courts. Lillian became a champion for Route 66 preservation. She worked with early preservation organizations, sharing her knowledge and advocating for the historic highway. She gave interviews to journalists and researchers documenting Route 60 SIX's history. She never sought fame, but her warmth and authenticity made her a beloved figure in the Route 66 community. In 1993, the Blue Swallow was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, official recognition of its architectural and cultural significance. For Lillian, this was validation of her life's work, confirmation that the Blue Swallow mattered. By the late 1990s, Lillian was in her 90s and facing the reality that she couldn't run the motel forever. But she was adamant about one thing. The Blue Swallow must be sold to someone who would preserve it, not to a developer who might tear it down for something more modern. She found the right buyers in Dale and Hilda Bakke. Dale was a licensed electrician who had worked for the Colorado prison system, but dreamed of a different life. When he heard about the Blue Swallow being for sale, he and Hilda drove to Tucumcari to see it. They fell in love immediately, not just with the motel, but with Lillian's vision of what it should be. Lillian sold them the Blue Swallow in 1998 when she was 91 years old. She had owned and operated it for 40 years, longer than many people work in any career. She died the following year, in 1999, having seen the Blue Swallow safely pass to caretakers who understood its value. Dale and Hilda Bakke ran the Blue Swallow for several years, maintaining Lillian's standards and continuing her tradition of warm hospitality. When they were ready to retire, they sold to Nancy and Kevin Mueller, who have since passed it to the current owners, Robert and Dawn. Each generation of owners has honored Lillian's legacy. The Blue Swallow today looks much as it did in the 1960s. The neon sign still glows every night, that beautiful blue bird beckoning travelers. The rooms still offer vintage charm combined with modern comfort. The attached garages still shelter guests' vehicles. Walking around the Blue Swallow today is like stepping back in time. The courtyard is beautifully maintained with decorative elements that evoke the 1950s. The office contains memorabilia and photographs documenting the motel's history. Each room is individually decorated, furnished with period-appropriate pieces that have been lovingly maintained or carefully sourced from other vintage properties. But the Blue Swallow isn't a museum. It's a working motel, still serving its original function of providing comfortable lodging to travelers. The rooms have modern amenities, comfortable mattresses, updated bathrooms, wireless internet, flat-screen televisions. The vintage aesthetic is preserved, but guest comfort isn't sacrificed. Staying at the Blue Swallow is an experience unlike checking into a modern chain hotel. The current owners greet you personally, often walking you to your room, pointing out features, making sure you have everything you need. They might sit with you in the courtyard in the evening, sharing stories about the motel's history and the current Route 66 preservation efforts. Other guests often gather in the courtyard as well, especially on warm evenings. There's a communal quality to the experience, a sense that you're all part of something special, all participants in keeping Route 66 alive. You might meet travelers from Japan or Germany who plan their entire American vacation around driving Route 66. You might talk with retired couples reliving their honeymoon trips from 50 years ago. You might encounter young families introducing their children to a piece of American history. The Blue Swallow has become a destination in itself. People don't just stay there because they need a place to sleep in Tucumcari. They plan their Route 66 journeys specifically to include a night at the Blue Swallow. They make reservations months in advance. They take photographs of the neon sign at twilight when it first starts to glow. They post reviews online, telling other travelers that this is a must-visit location. This destination status has allowed the Blue Swallow to thrive in an era when many independent motels struggle. The motel often operates at or near full capacity during the peak Route 66 travel season, from spring through fall. Even in winter, when tourism slows, the Blue Swallow maintains steady business from Route 66 enthusiasts and from the growing community of people who seek out authentic, historic accommodations. The Blue Swallow represents everything that makes Route 66 Motel special. It's a physical connection to the past, a building that has sheltered travelers for more than 80 years. It's a tribute to the vision and dedication of people like Lillian Redman, who poured their lives into these establishments. It's a living demonstration that preservation can work, that historic properties can be economically viable if they're properly maintained and authentically presented. And every night, when that neon Blue Swallow lights up against the New Mexico sky, it sends a message that transcends simple advertising. It says that the past isn't dead, that Route 66 still matters, that there's still magic to be found on the Mother Road if you know where to look. The Blue Swallow glows at night, and in that glow, you can see the reflection of 1,000 other motels that once lined Route 66. Most of them gone now, but this one's still here, still welcoming, still fulfilling the promise that was made more than 80 years ago. That travelers on Route 66 would find comfort, hospitality, and a place to rest on their journey across America. Part 3. Wigwam Villages, Sleeping in Teepees. If the Blue Swallow represents classic motor court elegance, the Wigwam Village Motels represent something entirely different. Whimsy, novelty, and unabashed roadside Americana at its most playful. The Wigwam Village concept was born in the mind of Frank A. Redford, a Kentucky businessman with an entrepreneurial spirit and a flair for the dramatic. In 1933, Frank built the first Wigwam Village in Horse Cave, Kentucky. His innovation was simple but brilliant. Instead of conventional motel rooms, he would offer guests the opportunity to sleep in structures shaped like Native American teepees. Frank didn't claim these were authentic. They were reinforced concrete, about 30 feet tall and 20 feet in diameter at the base, built in the approximate shape of Plains Indian teepees. Inside, they were equipped with modern amenities: beds, bathrooms, heating, and cooling. They were comfortable, functional motel rooms that just happened to be shaped like teepees. The first Wigwam Village was a hit. Travelers loved the novelty. Families with children were particularly drawn to the unique accommodations. Here was something they could talk about when they got home, a story to tell, a memory that would stand out from all the other nights spent in ordinary hotel rooms. Frank patented his design and began licensing it to operators in other locations. At the peak, there were 7 Wigwam villages spread across America. 3 of them were on Route 66. Wigwam Village number 6 in Holbrook, Arizona, Wigwam Village number 7 in Rialto, San Bernardino, California, and a location in New Mexico that no longer exists. Today, only 3 Wigwam villages survive. 2 of them are on Route 66, the Holbrook, Arizona location and the San Bernardino, California location. The third is the original in Cave City, Kentucky. These survivors have become iconic destinations, places that Route 66 enthusiasts make a point of visiting and often staying at. Let's focus on Wigwam Village number 6 in Holbrook, Arizona, which opened in 1950, right at the beginning of Route 60's golden age. The location was perfect. Holbrook was already a popular stopping point on Route 66, positioned at the edge of the Painted Desert with easy access to Petrified Forest National Park and other attractions. The Holbrook Wigwam Village consists of 15 individual teepee-shaped units arranged in a semicircle on the property, with a larger central teepee serving as the office and manager's residence. Each unit stands proudly against the Arizona sky, their distinctive conical shapes creating a visual spectacle that's unmistakable even from a distance. The wigwams are painted white with decorative patterns, and vintage cars from the 1940s and 50s are parked among them as decorative elements, creating photo opportunities and enhancing the retro atmosphere. At night, when the neon sign lights up displaying a glowing teepee and the words Wigwam Village, the effect is magical, a perfect encapsulation of mid-century roadside architecture. Inside the wigwams, the space is surprisingly functional despite the unusual shape. The beds are arranged around the perimeter, taking advantage of the circular floor plan. The bathroom is tucked into the back. The conical ceiling creates an interesting acoustic effect, and the whole experience of being inside a teepee-shaped room is charming in its artifice. Frank Redford insisted that all wigwam villages use specific furniture he had sourced, including hickory pieces that he felt were appropriate for the Native American theme he was evoking. Whether this constituted cultural respect or cultural appropriation is a question that has been debated in more recent years. But in the 1950s, the wigwams were simply seen as fun, family-friendly novelty accommodations. The Holbrook Wigwam Village thrived through the 1950s and 60s. Families loved it. Children were enchanted by the idea of sleeping in a teepee. Parents appreciated that the rooms were clean and comfortable despite their unusual shape. The motel became a destination, a place people specifically planned to stay rather than just stopping out of convenience. Then came the interstate era, and like so many Route 66 businesses, the Wigwam Village struggled. Interstate 40 bypassed Holbrook, and traffic on Route 66 declined dramatically. For a while, it looked like the Wigwam Village might not survive. The property went through difficult years, with occupancy rates dropping and maintenance becoming harder to afford. But the Wigwam Village had an advantage that more conventional motels lacked. It was unique. As Route 66 nostalgia began to build in the 1980s and 90s, the Wigwam Village became one of the must-see, must-stay locations on the Mother Road. Its very novelty, which might have seemed like a liability in the age of standardized chain motels, became its greatest asset in the age of heritage tourism. The motel has been owned by the Lewis family since 1988. Chester and Clifton Lewis purchased the property and committed themselves to preserving its character while maintaining it as a functional, comfortable accommodation. They've carefully balanced authenticity with necessary modernization, keeping the vintage feel while ensuring the rooms are safe and meet contemporary standards. In 2012, The Wigwam Village was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, official recognition of its significance as an example of roadside architecture and Route 66 culture. This designation has helped with preservation efforts and has further cemented the Wigwam Village's status as a historic landmark. Staying at the Wigwam Village today is a deliberately retro experience. The rooms are small by modern standards, the furnishings are vintage, and the whole experience is charmingly dated. But that's exactly what guests want. They're not looking for a Marriott or a Hilton. They're looking for an authentic piece of Route 66 history, and that's precisely what the Wigwam Village delivers. The motel has benefited enormously from its appearance in the Pixar film Cars, released in 2006. The Cozy Cone Motel in the film was directly inspired by the Wigwam Village, and after the movie's release, the Holbrook location saw a surge in visitors, many of them families with young children who wanted to stay at the real Cozy Cone. This mainstream media exposure introduced Route 66 and the Wigwam Village to a new generation. Children who had never heard of Route 66 learn about it from Cars and then convince their parents to plan Route 66 road trips. The Wigwam Village became a pilgrimage site for Cars fans, who would take photographs with the vintage cars on the property and marvel at how closely the real motel resembled the animated version. The other surviving Route 66, Wigwam Village in San Bernardino, California, has a similar story but a somewhat different character. This was Wigwam Village number 7, the last one Frank Redford built, opening in 1949. Redford himself eventually moved to California and ran this motel until his retirement. The San Bernardino Wigwam Village has 19 teepees, slightly more than the Holbrook location. It's positioned in what is now a somewhat rough urban area, which makes it feel very different from the desert setting of the Holbrook property. But it too has been carefully preserved and continues to operate, offering travelers the chance to sleep in a wigwam. In 2003, the San Bernardino Wigwam Village was purchased by the Patel family, who undertook a careful restoration. Like many historic motel preservationists, they faced the challenge of maintaining authenticity while ensuring guests' safety and comfort. They succeeded admirably, and the motel continues to welcome guests who want a unique Route 66 experience. The Wigwam Villages represent a particular strand of American roadside culture, the novelty architecture that flourished in the mid-20th century. This was an era when business owners competed for attention with buildings shaped like things: hot dogs, donuts, teepees. The idea was that if your building was sufficiently eye-catching and unusual, travelers would remember it, talk about it, and return to it. This approach created a landscape of whimsy along American highways, a parade of oversized and oddly shaped structures that became part of the joy of road travel. Sadly, most of this novelty architecture has been demolished. The economic incentives that created it disappeared when interstates bypassed the old highways, and the buildings, which were often expensive to maintain, were torn down. The surviving Wigwam villages are therefore precious, not just as Route 66 landmarks, but as examples of a broader cultural phenomenon that has largely vanished from the American landscape. They remind us of an era when businesses tried to attract customers through playfulness and imagination rather than just efficiency and low prices. For guests, spending a night in a wigwam is often a highlight of their Route 66 journey. The unusual shape of the room, the vintage furnishings, the sense of sleeping in a piece of living history, all of it combines to create a memorable experience. Children, in particular, find it magical, and many adults report that staying in a wigwam makes them feel like children again, recapturing a sense of wonder and adventure. The wigwam villages prove that historic preservation doesn't have to be solemn or serious. Yes, these buildings have architectural and cultural significance. Yes, they're important pieces of American history, but they're also fun, whimsical, delightful. They remind us that the past wasn't all gravity and importance, that there was joy and playfulness too, and that preserving that playfulness is just as valuable as preserving more conventionally serious historic structures. Every night, when the neon teepees light up at the wigwam villages in Holbrook and San Bernardino, they glow with a particular kind of magic, the magic of dreams made concrete, of imagination turned into reality, of the optimistic belief that life should be not just functional but fun. In their glow, we can see the reflection of countless families who slept there over the decades, children excited to stay in a teepee, parents charmed by the novelty, all of them part of the great American tradition of hitting the road and seeing where it takes you. Part 4. The Ghosts Along the Highway. As the evening deepens and we continue our journey down Route 66, we come to a topic whispered about more than openly discussed, the question of whether these old motels, these witnesses to so much human drama, might be home to more than just memories. Are the motels of Route 66 haunted? It's a question that has no definitive answer, but the stories persist, passed from traveler to traveler, accumulating in online forums and late-night conversations in motel courtyards. Let's be clear from the start. We're dealing with folklore here, stories that circulate in communities, accounts that can't be verified, but that nonetheless capture something true about how people experience these spaces. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the stories themselves are interesting because they reveal what these places mean to people and how the weight of history can make itself felt in unexpected ways. Old buildings accumulate stories, and some of those stories are tragic. Over the many decades that Route 66 motels operated, people died in them. Some deaths were natural, heart attacks and strokes, elderly travelers who simply didn't wake up. Some were accidents. And yes, some are suicides or murders. Motels, because of their accessibility and anonymity, were sometimes settings for the darkest moments of human life. These events, whether we acknowledge them or not, become part of a building's history. They leave impressions, if not supernatural ones, then certainly psychological ones. When people report ghostly experiences in old motels, these histories provide context, a framework for interpreting strange sensations or unexplained occurrences. Motel rooms are inherently liminal spaces. They're not home. They're not destinations. They're in-between places, temporary waypoints on journeys. You don't belong there in any permanent sense. You're just passing through. This transient quality can create a sense of unease, a feeling that something is slightly off, and some people interpret this feeling as a supernatural presence. Old motels amplify this effect. The vintage furniture, the dated decor, the sense that thousands of people have slept in this room before you. All of it can be either comforting or deeply unsettling, depending on your state of mind. Add to this the sounds that old buildings make, the creaks and groans, the settling of old wood, the clanging of ancient pipes, and you have the perfect environment for ghost stories to flourish. One story that circulates involves a motel in Amarillo, Texas, though accounts vary on which specific property is involved. According to the tale, sometime in the 1960s, a young couple staying at the motel got into a violent argument. The fight escalated tragically, and the man killed his girlfriend before fleeing. The woman's body wasn't discovered until housekeeping came to clean the room the next day. The room where this allegedly happened, usually identified as Room 7 or Room 13, is said to be haunted by the murdered woman's spirit. Guests who stay in that room report feeling a presence, a profound sense of sadness permeating the space. Some claim to have seen a female figure standing by the window or sitting on the edge of the bed, visible for just a moment before vanishing. Others report the smell of perfume that wasn't there before or the sound of crying in the night. Can we verify this story? No. Murders did happen in motels over the years, so the premise is plausible. Whether any specific room in any specific motel is actually haunted is a matter of personal belief. But the story persists, told and retold, gaining details with each telling, becoming part of the Route 66 folklore. Another common story involves the ghost of a child, usually a little girl around 6 or 7 years old. The circumstances of her death vary depending on who's telling the story. Some versions say she drowned in a motel pool. Others claim she became ill and died despite her parents' efforts to get help. Still others hint at something more sinister. In these stories, the girl's ghost is said to haunt the motel grounds. People report hearing the sound of a child laughing or crying when no children are present. Some claim to have seen a little girl in an old-fashioned dress playing in the courtyard at dusk. One detailed account describes a couple kept awake all night by the sound of a child bouncing a ball in the room above them, only to discover in the morning that the motel was single-story. These stories follow patterns that folklorists recognize. They often feature sympathetic victims, children or women, whose deaths were untimely or unjust. The supernatural activity is usually melancholic rather than malevolent, conveying sadness rather than fear. These are ghosts trapped in place, repeating actions or emotions tied to their deaths. Beyond specific ghost stories, there are more general accounts of motels that just feel off, where guests consistently report strange experiences. Lights flickering without electrical explanation. Televisions turning on by themselves. Curtains moving when windows are closed. Objects that guests swear they left in one place showing up somewhere else. Feelings of being watched, especially in bathrooms or when looking into mirrors. Sleep paralysis experiences are particularly common in motel ghost stories. This is a phenomenon where someone wakes but can't move, often accompanied by pressure on the chest and a sense of dread. During these episodes, people sometimes report seeing shadowy figures. Sleep paralysis has a scientific explanation, a temporary disconnect between consciousness and the body's sleep mechanism. But experiencing it is terrifying, and in an already spooky environment, it's easy to interpret it as supernatural. Some motels have leaned into their haunted reputations. They don't officially advertise themselves as haunted. That might scare away more customers than it attracts, but they don't discourage the stories either. A reputation for being haunted can draw paranormal enthusiasts and people looking for unusual experiences. Ghost hunting groups have visited various Route 66 motels over the years, conducting investigations with electromagnetic field detectors, digital recorders for capturing electronic voice phenomena, and infrared cameras. These investigations sometimes claim to find evidence of paranormal activity, orbs and photographs, unexplained temperature fluctuations, EVP recordings supposedly capturing ghostly voices. Skeptics point out that most of these findings have mundane explanations. Orbs and photographs are usually dust particles. Temperature changes can be caused by drafts or HVAC systems. EVP recordings often capture radio interference or pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive patterns in random noise. But believers remain convinced. Beyond ghosts, Route 66 motels feature in other kinds of mysterious stories. There are accounts of time slips, where travelers report staying at a motel that seemed oddly old-fashioned, with staff in vintage clothing and decor that seemed too authentic. When they try to find the motel again or look it up online, they discovered it had closed decades earlier or perhaps never existed at all. These stories are almost certainly false memories or creative fiction, but they tap into something real about the Route 66 experience. Staying at a well-preserved vintage motel can feel like stepping back in time. The immersive quality can blur the line between past and present, making time-slip stories psychologically resonant, even if they're not literally true. There are also UFO stories associated with some Route 66 motels, particularly in the Southwest. Given the region's association with UFO phenomena, Roswell, Area 51, desert strangeness in general, it's not surprising that travelers report seeing unusual lights in the sky while staying at remote motels. One account from the 1970s describes a family staying at a motel outside Roswell who claimed to see a disc-shaped object hovering over the parking lot in the middle of the night. They said the object emitted a low humming sound and bathed the motel in strange blue-green light before shooting straight up and disappearing. The family was supposedly so disturbed that they left immediately, driving through the night to get away. Again, we can't verify this story. It could be fabricated, misidentified, or exactly what the family claimed. What matters is that Route 66 motels feature in these narratives, becoming settings for mysterious encounters and unexplained phenomena. Why are old motels such fertile ground for ghost stories and strange tales? Several factors contribute. First, sheer numbers. A motel operating for 50 years with 20 rooms hosted tens of thousands of guests. Statistically, some had intense emotional experiences. Arguments, breakups, receipt of terrible news. These charged experiences can leave impressions that later guests might sense. Second, old motels often look spooky. The vintage aesthetics, charming in daylight, can seem unsettling at night. L'on dimly lit hallway, flickering neon casting strange shadow, unfamiliar fourniture shop. It all creates an atmosphere where imagination can run wild. Third, isolation. Many surviving Route 66 motels are in small towns or isolated locations bypassed by interstates. You might be the only guest. All those empty rooms, all that silent space can feel eerie. Fourth, knowledge shapes experience. If you know or think you know that someone died in your room, you'll interpret every creak and shadow through that lens. A perfect example of confirmation bias. But having acknowledged the psychological and sociological explanations, we should also acknowledge that consciousness and reality are stranger than we sometimes admit. People have reported genuinely inexplicable experiences in old motels, things that don't fit neatly into imagination or misinterpretation. Shared experiences are particularly interesting. When two people who haven't discussed ghosts both report seeing the same figure in the same location, that's harder to dismiss. When multiple guests over years report identical experiences in the same room without communicating with each other, the pattern demands attention. There's also the question of why some rooms or motels attract reports while others, equally old and empty, don't. If hauntings were purely psychological, you'd expect random distribution. The fact that specific locations accumulate specific stories suggests something, not necessarily supernatural, distinguishes these places. For travelers staying at old Route 66 motels, the possibility of a haunting, real or imagined, adds excitement. It makes the night more adventurous, the history more tangible. Even skeptics can enjoy a moment of fear, lying in darkness, listening to the building settle, and wondering if that sound was really just the pipes. Motel owners have mixed feelings about haunted reputations. It could be good for business, generating interest and attracting curious visitors, but might also scare away families or business travelers wanting a normal, comfortable stay. Many adopt a don't ask, don't tell policy, not advertising ghosts, but sharing stories if guests bring up the subject. Whether Route 66 motels are truly haunted is less important than why we want them to be. Ghost stories acknowledge that these places have history, that they've witnessed human drama, joy and sorrow, life and death. They're a way of connecting emotionally to the past, a feeling that previous guests left something behind beyond where on carpets. The motels glow at night with neon and nostalgia, but also perhaps with something more mysterious, a luminosity that can't be measured, a presence that can't be captured on camera, a sense that the past is never quite past, and that in these liminal spaces between then and now, anything might be possible. Part 5. The Long Decline and Miraculous Revival. The story of Route 66's decline is one of the saddest chapters in American roadside history, a slow-motion tragedy that played out over 3 decades, devastating small towns and destroying countless dreams. But it's also a story that, against all odds, found redemption in revival, preservation, and renewed appreciation. The decline began with the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, signed by President Dwight D. Eisenhower. This massive legislation authorized construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highways, the largest public works project in American history. The interstates would be modern, limited-access highways designed for high-speed travel, connecting major cities across America. The benefits were undeniable. Interstates were safer, with no cross-traffic, no railroad crossings, no traffic lights. They were faster, designed for speeds of 65 miles per hour or higher. They were more efficient for commercial trucking, and they were engineered to consistent standards nationwide. But for Route 66 and communities along it, the interstates spelled disaster. The new highways were designed to bypass city centers and small towns, eliminating the congestion that slowed travel on old routes. This made perfect sense from an engineering standpoint, but it meant towns that had prospered serving highway travelers would be cut off from that traffic. The impact wasn't immediate or uniform. The interstate highway system took decades to complete. Different sections of Route 66 were bypassed at different times, but the pattern was consistent and devastating. When a new stretch of interstate opened, traffic on the corresponding section of Route 66 plummeted virtually overnight. For motel owners, watching the decline was agonizing. Many had invested heavily in their properties through the 1950s, adding swimming pools, air conditioning, upgrading rooms, commissioning new neon signs. They'd taken out loans to finance improvements, confident that business would continue growing. Now they faced declining revenues and mounting debts. The initial impact was often subtle. Occupancy rates dropping from 90% to 80%, then to 70%. But motels operate on thin margins. A 10 or 20% revenue reduction can mean the difference between profit and loss. Owners try to compensate by cutting costs, reducing staff, deferring maintenance, cutting advertising. But cost-cutting only delayed the inevitable. As revenues continued declining and interstates siphoned off more traffic, motels that had thrived just years earlier struggled to survive. Some owners tried to adapt, lowering rates to attract budget travelers, marketing to locals for weekly or monthly rates, adding restaurants or gift shops for diversification. A few succeeded in reinventing themselves, finding niche markets or unique selling propositions, allowing them to compete without drive-by traffic. But most couldn't make it work. The fundamental problem was they'd been designed to serve highway travelers, and the highway travelers were gone, speeding past on the interstate 10 or 20 miles away. The social impact of this decline devastated small towns. Route 66 hadn't just been a road, it had been an economic lifeline. For towns in remote areas, far from major cities or other economic centers, highway traffic provided steady revenue. Gas stations, restaurants, souvenir shops, and motels employed local people, paid local taxes, supported local economies. When that traffic disappeared, economic foundations crumbled. Businesses failed in cascades. First one motel closed, then another. As motels closed, there was less reason for travelers to stop, hurting restaurants and gas stations. As those businesses failed, towns became less attractive places to live, and people moved away seeking opportunity elsewhere. This outmigration reduced the local customer base even further, accelerating decline. By the 1970s, many Route 66 towns were in serious trouble. Main streets that had bustled with activity in the 1950s were lined with empty storefronts. Motels stood vacant, signs dark, swimming pools filled with debris, buildings deteriorating. The optimistic energy of the post-war era had been replaced by abandonment and decay. Empty motels are inherently melancholy structures. They were designed to be welcoming, to glow with light and promise hospitality. When they stand vacant, they look wrong like stopped machines, their purpose unfulfilled. Nature began reclaiming many abandoned motels. Weeds grew through parking lot cracks. Windows broke, either from vandalism or natural decay, and rain got in, causing water damage and mold. Roofs developed leaks that went unrepaired. Paint peeled. Neon signs, those glorious creations that had blazed with color, flickered and went dark as tubes broke and transformers failed. Some properties were demolished. Owners or cities that took possession through tax foreclosure decided abandoned buildings were eyesores and hazards, better torn down than left to decay. Demolition was often cheaper than renovation, especially with no obvious buyer or use for the property. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of Route 66 motels were bulldozed, leaving only concrete slabs or empty lots. Other properties lingered in limbo. Owners who couldn't afford to maintain them, but couldn't afford demolition or were too emotionally attached to let go simply locked the doors and walked away. These abandoned but standing motels became eerie reminders of better times. Ghost buildings haunting the landscape, slowly deteriorating year by year. For the people who had built and run these motels, the abandonment was tragic. These were their dreams made concrete, businesses into which they'd poured decades of their lives. Watching them fall apart was heartbreaking. Some motel owners managed to exit before collapse became complete, selling to the last optimists who believed Route 66 might come back, or to speculators with other plans, or simply to anyone willing to take on the debt. Often these sales were at fractions of what properties had been worth a decade earlier. Owners who'd invested life savings were lucky to break even. Others weren't so fortunate. They rode the decline all the way down, operating at losses for years, draining savings and retirement accounts, trying to keep businesses alive, hoping for turnarounds that never came. Eventually, they'd stop paying mortgages or property taxes, and banks or cities would take possession. After devoting their lives to their motels, they'd lose everything. The emotional toll was immense. Running a motel had never been easy, requiring constant attention, long hours, and willingness to deal with all kinds of people at all hours. But it had also provided livelihood, purpose, and community connection. Motel owners were important in small towns, business leaders, employers, community members. Losing the motel meant losing all of that. By 1985, when Route 66 was officially decommissioned as a U.S. highway, much of it was already bypassed and forgotten. The road that had connected Chicago to Los Angeles for nearly 60 years ceased to exist officially. The physical road didn't disappear, but its status varied. Some sections became state highways or local roads. Others were abandoned entirely. Still others were replaced or obliterated by the interstates. For surviving motels, the decommissioning was both ending and paradoxically beginning. The ending was obvious. The road they'd been built to serve no longer existed as a coherent entity. But this ending also opened a door to revival, forcing people to confront what had been lost. Within a few years of Route 66's decommissioning, a preservation movement began coalescing, made up of former business owners, local historians, and travelers who remembered the old road fondly and didn't want to see it forgotten. They argued that Route 66 wasn't just a highway, but a piece of American history and culture deserving preservation and celebration. The movement to preserve Route 66 began almost immediately after decommissioning. In 1987, the Route 66 Association was founded in Arizona. Their goal was preserving remaining sections and promoting Route 66 as a heritage tourism destination. The association faced significant challenges. Many Route 66 sections were in poor condition. Remaining businesses struggled. There was no official support for preservation. The federal government had moved on. State governments saw little value maintaining bypassed roads. Local communities often lacked resources or will to invest in preservation. But the association had passion and a compelling vision. They argued Route 66 represented something important in American history. The era of automobile travel and post-war prosperity, the small-town America rapidly disappearing, the sense of freedom and possibility from the open road. These values resonated with people, particularly those with personal memories of traveling Route 66 in its heyday. The preservation movement got major boosts from media attention. Books about Route 66 began appearing, documenting history and celebrating culture. Photographers captured images of abandoned motels and fading signs, creating visual records that were both documentary and artistic. These books and photo essays helped build public awareness and appreciation. Television and film also played important roles. The 1960s TV series Route 66 was rediscovered in syndication. Documentaries about the road's history aired on networks like PBS. Hollywood began using Route 66 locations for films wanting authentic vintage American settings. Perhaps most significantly, Route 66 was getting attention from international travelers, particularly from Europe and Japan. These foreign tourists were drawn to Route 66 as an icon of American culture. They wanted to experience real America as they imagined it from movies and music. They sought out surviving motels and diners, not despite their vintage nature, but because of it. This international interest was economically important. Foreign tourists were willing to pay premium prices for authentic Route 66 experiences. They'd book rooms at vintage motels specifically because they were vintage. They'd eat at old diners for atmosphere, not just food. This created a new market struggling Route 66 businesses could serve. In 1990, Route 66 preservation achieved a major victory when the highway was designated a National Scenic Byway. This didn't restore Route 66 as an official U.S. highway, but it recognized historical and cultural significance. More importantly, it made the route eligible for federal funds for preservation and promotion. Individual states along Route 66 began getting involved. Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California each established their own Route 66 associations and tourism promotion programs. They installed signs marking the historic route. They created maps and guides. They promoted Route 66 as a tourist destination. For motels that had survived the dark decades, this revival brought new opportunities but also challenges. The opportunity was obvious. Tourists specifically interested in Route 66 would seek out authentic vintage motels. A motel that might have seemed hopelessly outdated in 1985 could be marketed as delightfully retro in 1995. But serving the heritage tourism market required different skills and approaches. It required understanding that guests were coming for an experience, not just a bed. It required maintaining vintage character while meeting modern standards for cleanliness and comfort. It required effective marketing to reach people planning Route 66 trips. Some motel owners adapted successfully. They invested in preserving and restoring historic features. They sought listing on the National Register of Historic Places. They connected with Route 66 associations and tourism bureaus. They established websites and social media presence. They embraced their role as stewards of history. Today, Route 66's status as a cultural icon is firmly established. The highway has gone from forgotten relic to celebrated monument. Route 66 has become a brand, used to sell everything from beer to blue jeans. The Disney/Pixar film Cars, released in 2006, introduced Route 66 to another generation of Americans. The preservation movement has achieved remarkable success. Hundreds of miles of Route 66 have been preserved or restored. Dozens of historic motels, restaurants, and businesses remain in operation. The highway has been documented through books, films, websites, and museums. The motels that have survived into the preservation era represent both continuity and transformation. They continue serving their original function, providing lodging to travelers, but in a completely different context. They're no longer just places to sleep, but historical experiences, tangible connections to the past, living monuments to an era when American travel looked very different. Every night, when the neon signs of these preserved motels light up, they glow with more than just electricity. They glow with the light of historical memory, with the dreams of people who built them, with the stories of millions who stayed in them, and with the hope that even in our modern, fast-paced world, there's still room for the slower, more personal experience of the Mother Road. Part 6. The Neon Glow. artistry in glass and gas. But let's pause our journey for a moment and talk about perhaps the most iconic element of Route 66 motels, the feature that even now, decades after many of these establishments closed, continues to draw photographers, artists, and nostalgia travelers from around the world. Let's talk about the neon signs. If the motels were the bones of Route 66, the neon signs were its soul, glowing beacons of color and light that transformed the highway into a ribbon of fire and beauty once the sun went down. These weren't just advertisements. They were folk art, expressions of American optimism and creativity rendered in bent glass tubes filled with glowing gas. The story of neon begins in France, where inventor Georges Claude first demonstrated neon lighting in 1910. The technology made its way to America in the 1920s, and by the 1930s, neon signs were becoming common in American cities, particularly for theaters, restaurants, and hotels. But it was along America's highways, and especially along Route 66, that neon truly flourished as an art form. The reason was simple: visibility. A motel owner on Route 66 in the 1940s or 50s faced intense competition. There might be a dozen motels in a small town, all vying for the attention of travelers passing through at 50 or 60 miles per hour. How do you make your motel stand out? How do you catch someone's eye quickly enough that they pull off the highway and give you their business? The answer was neon. A spectacular neon sign, visible from a mile away, bright enough to be seen even in harsh desert sunlight, unmistakable and memorable. A sign that didn't just say motel, but proclaimed it, celebrated it, made staying at your establishment seem like an adventure, a treat, something special. The golden age of Route 66 neon, from roughly the late 1930s through the early 1960s, produced an astonishing variety of signs. Each one was custom-made, designed specifically for the motel it represented, reflecting the owner's personality, dreams, and understanding of what would attract customers. Take the Blue Swallows sign, which we've already discussed. That graceful blue bird, wings spread in flight, was chosen because it suggested freedom, movement, the joy of travel. The bird is rendered in blue neon tubing that creates a gentle, appealing glow. Below it, the words Blue Swallow Motel appear in script lettering that looks handwritten, personal, welcoming. And crucially, there's that magic phrase: 100% refrigerated air, promising weary travelers relief from the sweltering heat of a New Mexico summer. Or consider the Wigwam Village signs, featuring neon outlined teepees that left no doubt about what made these motels special. The signs were whimsical, fun, impossible to miss. A family driving down Route 66 would see that glowing teepee from far away, and the kids in the back seat would start pleading, "Can we stay there, please? In the teepee motel?" The sign did its job before the family even pulled into the parking lot. The Munger Moss Motel in Lebanon, Missouri, has a sign that's become legendary among Route 66 enthusiasts. It's a towering neon arrow, the kind of sign that says unmistakably this way. The arrow is brilliant red with yellow and white accents, and it sits atop a tall pole so it can be seen from a great distance. Below the arrow, Munger Moss appears in distinctive lettering. This sign was manufactured by Claude Neon Federal Sign Company and represents the pinnacle of commercial neon artistry. When it was restored in recent years, people came from across the country just to see it lit for the first time in decades. The process of creating these signs was an art form in itself, A sign designer would work with the motel owner to develop a concept. What message did they want to convey? What colors did they want? What imagery? Once the design was approved, craftspeople would begin the painstaking process of bringing it to life. The glass tubing had to be heated until it was pliable, then carefully bent into the desired shapes. This required steady hands and years of experience. A single mistake, bending too far or not far enough, could ruin hours of work. The bent tubes would then be filled with gas, neon for red and orange hues, argon with mercury for blue shades, helium, and other gases for different effects. The tubes would be mounted onto a backing, usually metal, along with the electrical components, transformers to step up voltage, wiring, sometimes mechanisms to create flashing or chasing effects where lights would turn on and off in sequence. The whole assemblage would be mounted on a frame or pole, positioned for maximum visibility from the highway. The best Route 66 neon signs had several key features. First, they were big. Not just physically large, though many were enormous, but bold, confident, assertive. They didn't whisper, they announced. Second, they used color effectively. The warm glow of neon red, the cool elegance of neon blue, the eye-catching brightness of neon yellow and white. Third, they incorporated movement. Many signs had elements that flashed or appeared to move, creating dynamic displays that were even more attention-grabbing. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, they had personality. The best signs weren't generic. They reflected something unique about the motel they represented. The Aztec Motel in Albuquerque had a sign featuring a neon Aztec warrior, connecting to the region's Native American heritage. The Western Motel in Sayre, Oklahoma, topped its sign with a neon cowboy hat, immediately evoking the frontier spirit. The Doghouse Drive-In in Albuquerque had a sign with a wagging tail, bringing playfulness and motion to what might otherwise be a straightforward restaurant sign. These signs were expensive. A really spectacular custom neon sign in the 1950s might cost thousands of dollars, a significant investment for a small business owner. But owners understood that the sign was essential marketing. It worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, attracting customers without any additional effort. A great sign could be the difference between success and failure. As the 1960s turned into the 1970s and Route 66 began its decline, maintaining these signs became increasingly difficult. Neon is delicate. Glass tubes break. Transformers fail. Electrical connections corrode. Regular maintenance is essential, and maintenance requires money and expertise. As motels struggled financially, sign maintenance was often deferred. Tubes would break and not be replaced. Transformers would fail and the sign would go dark. By the 1980s and 90s, many of Route 66's greatest neon signs were dark, broken, or had been removed entirely. Some had been sold to collectors or salvage yards. Others sat in storage, forgotten. Still others simply deteriorated where they stood, becoming rusted hulks that bore little resemblance to their former glory. But then, as the Route 66 preservation movement gained strength, attention turned to the signs. Preservationists recognized that these signs were as much a part of Route 60 SIX's heritage as the buildings themselves. In some ways, they were more important because they were what people remembered most vividly. Ask someone who traveled Route 66 in the 1950s what they remember, and they'll often describe the signs before they describe the motels. Restoration of vintage neon signs is challenging and expensive. You need craftspeople with traditional skills, people who know how to bend glass tubing, who understand the chemistry of different gas mixtures, who can work with high-voltage electrical systems safely. These skills had nearly died out by the late 20th century, but the Route 66 preservation movement helped revive them. The National Park Service Route 66 Corridor Preservation Program, which operated from 1999 to 2019, provided crucial funding for sign restoration. The program awarded grants that allowed motel owners and communities to hire specialists to restore vintage signs. The results were spectacular. In New Mexico alone, the Neon Restoration Project funded by the National Park Service brought dozens of signs back to life. The Teepee Curios sign in Tucumcari, featuring a bright teepee and bold lettering. The Wild Rhodosphere in Moriarty, a spinning globe of neon that looks like something from a science fiction movie. The elegant Lexington Hotel sign in Gallup, with its sophisticated design and rich colors. Each restoration was a small miracle, a piece of the past brought back to vibrant life. The process of restoring a vintage neon sign is meticulous. First, the sign must be carefully documented, photographed from every angle, every detail recorded. Then it's disassembled. Broken or missing glass tubes must be recreated by craftspeople using the same techniques employed in the original construction. Electrical components are inspected, repaired, or replaced as necessary, though care is taken to maintain as much of the original equipment as possible. The backing and frame are restored, rust removed, paint refreshed. Finally, everything is reassembled, tested, and installed. The moment when a restored sign is lit for the first time is always emotional. Crowds gather for relighting ceremonies, events that have become celebrations for entire communities. When the Highway Cafe sign in Veneta, Oklahoma, was restored and relit in spring 2023, after years of being dark, people came from multiple states to witness it. The owner, Beth Hilburn, was so moved by the community response that she's kept the sign lit every night since, even though the restaurant is usually closed after dark. I remember my family taking road trips, and I remember the neon signs vividly, Hilburn said in an interview. That's the power of these signs. They're not just commercial artifacts. They're memory triggers, connections to personal and collective pasts. Today, restored Route 66 neon signs have become pilgrimage sites for photographers and Route 66 enthusiasts. The best time to see them is twilight, that magical hour when the sky is still partly light but dark enough for the neon to really glow. Photographers call it the blue hour, and it's when Route 66 signs look their absolute best. The neon colors set against deep blue skies, creating images of almost surreal beauty. Social media has been both blessing and challenge for these signs. On one hand, Instagram and other platforms have helped spread awareness, with millions of people seeing photos of Route 66 neon who might never visit in person. On the other hand, the most photogenic signs have become so popular that they can be crowded, especially at peak times, with people jostling for the perfect shot. Some communities have created neon parks where restored signs are displayed together. The Route 66 Neon Park in St. Robert, Missouri, features multiple restored signs in a roadside park setting. Casa Grande, Arizona, opened a Neon Lights Park in 2019 with 14 lovingly restored signs from the 1950s. These parks serve both preservation and education functions, keeping signs safe and accessible while teaching visitors about their history and significance. The Neon Museum in Las Vegas, while not specifically focused on Route 66, has become an important resource for neon preservation generally. The museum collects, restores, and displays historic neon signs from across America, and its work has helped train a new generation of neon craftspeople. Executive Director Aaron Berger describes neon light as warm and inviting, qualities that help explain why these signs remain so beloved. But perhaps the most important thing about Route 66 neon signs is that the best of them are still serving their original purpose. They're still glowing above working motels, still attracting travelers, still promising rest and welcome to people on the road. The blue swallow's bird still spreads its wings in Tucumcari. The Wigwam village teepees still glow in Holbrook. The Munger moss arrow still points travelers to Lebanon. These signs are living links to the past, functioning pieces of American folk art that you can still experience as they were meant to be experienced. You can pull off Route 66, drawn by that glow in the gathering darkness, and check into a motel just as travelers did 70 years ago. The experience has been preserved, not just the artifact. Standing in a motel parking lot at night, looking up at a restored neon sign glowing against the stars, you can feel the connection to everyone who stood in that same spot over the decades. All those travelers, all those journeys, all those moments of arrival and rest. The neon glow connects past and present, memory and experience, history and living tradition. The signs glow at night, and in their glow, Route 66 itself seems to glow, a ribbon of light across the American heartland, still beckoning, still promising adventure and discovery to anyone willing to slow down, pull off the interstate, and follow the old road. Part 7. Voices from the Mother Road, Personal Stories. Numbers and dates and historical facts tell one kind of story about Route 66. But to really understand what these motels meant, what they still mean, we need to hear the personal stories, the individual voices of people whose lives intersected with the Mother Road. Let's start with Emma Martinez, who grew up in the 1950s in a small town in New Mexico. Her parents ran a motor court on Route 66, and Emma's childhood was shaped by the endless stream of travelers passing through. Now in her 70s, Emma recalls those years with a mixture of nostalgia and clear-eyed honesty about what life was really like. People romanticize it now, Emma says, but running a motel was hard work. My parents were on call 24 hours a day. Middle of the night, someone would pull in needing a room, and my father would get up, put on his robe, and go check them in. My mother cleaned every room herself, and she was fanatical about it. Every towel had to be perfectly folded. Every surface had to shine. She took such pride in that motel. But Emma also remembers the excitement. We met people from everywhere. Families driving from New York to California, all their belongings packed into their car. Salesmen who came through every month like clockwork, and we got to know them. Movie stars occasionally, though they usually stayed in fancier places. But once in a while, someone famous would pull in, and word would spread through town. Emma's most vivid memory involves a family who stayed at the motel in the summer of 1961. They were from Wisconsin, and they had 4 kids, all under 10. The kids were so excited to be on this big adventure, driving to Disneyland. They swam in our pool until they were exhausted, and the parents sat in the courtyard just talking with my parents about where they'd been, what they'd seen. The Wisconsin family checked out the next morning and continued west. 3 days later, Emma's parents received a phone call. The family had been in a terrible accident in Arizona. The father had been killed. The mother and children were hospitalized. The mother had asked the hospital to call Emma's parents because they were the last friendly faces she'd seen before the tragedy. My parents drove to Arizona, Emma remembers. They stayed with that family for a week, helped make arrangements, helped the widow figure out how to get home with 4 kids and no husband. They didn't have to do that. These people weren't family or friends. They'd just been guests for one night. But my parents felt responsible somehow, like that night at our motel created a bond. This story illustrates something important about Route 66 motor courts. They weren't just commercial transactions. They were human connections, however brief. The best motel owners understood that they were providing more than just a room. They were part of people's journeys, and sometimes those journeys included tragedy as well as joy. Robert Chang's family operated the Lucky Dragon Motor Court outside of Gallup, New Mexico, from the 1940s through the 1980s. Robert was born in 1955 and literally grew up in the motel, his family's living quarters attached to the office. "I did my homework in the motel office," Robert recalls. "I'd be working on math problems, and guests would come in to check in or out, and I'd watch my father interact with them." He had this way of making everyone feel welcome. He'd remember if someone had stayed before, ask about their family, make them feel like coming back to the Lucky Dragon was like coming home. But Robert also witnessed the decline. In the late 60s, we could see it starting. Business was still good, but you could feel something changing. Then the interstate opened, and it was like someone flipped a switch. Overnight, we went from being almost full every night to half empty, then to a third full. My parents tried everything. They lowered prices, advertised more, improved the rooms. But people wanted the convenience of the interstate. By the early 80s, the Lucky Dragon was struggling badly. Robert had left for college and a career in engineering, but he could see the toll the failing motel was taking on his parents. They put everything into that motel. It was their retirement plan, their legacy. Watching it die was like watching part of themselves die. The Lucky Dragon closed in 1984. The property was eventually sold and demolished. Robert drives through Gallup occasionally, and the lot where his childhood home stood is now a vacant lot, weeds growing through cracked pavement. Sometimes I want to stop and look around, try to remember exactly where things were, Robert says. But I don't. It's too painful. I'd rather remember it the way it was, when it was alive and busy and full of people. Robert's story is multiplied hundreds of times along Route 66. Families who built their lives around motels only to lose everything when the interstate came through. The economic devastation is documented, but the emotional devastation is harder to quantify. Not all the stories are sad. Jennifer and Tom Morrison represent a different kind of Route 66 story, one of discovery and renewal. In 2008, burned out from corporate careers in Boston, they decided to take a year off and drive Route 66. They'd vaguely heard of the highway and thought it might be interesting. "We had no idea what we were getting into," Jennifer laughs. "We thought it would just be a nice drive, see some scenery. But from the first day, we were hooked. The history, the small towns, the people we met, it was like discovering a hidden America we didn't know existed." They stayed at the Blue Swallow in Tucumcari, and that experience changed their lives. We pulled in at sunset, and that neon sign was just starting to glow, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, Jennifer remembers. The owners, Nancy and Kevin, they sat with us in the courtyard for hours, telling us stories about the motel, about Route 66, about all the people who'd stayed there. And we just fell in love with the whole thing. By the end of their Route 66 journey, Jennifer and Tom had decided to buy a motel. They spent the next year searching for the right property, something historic, something they could restore and operate. They eventually found a small motor court in Missouri that had been closed for years. They bought it, spent 2 years renovating it, and reopened it in 2011. Best decision we ever made, Tom says. It's hard work, absolutely. We work longer hours than we ever did in corporate jobs. But it's fulfilling in a way those jobs never were. We're preserving something important. We're part of a community. And every night, we get to share Route 66 with people who are as excited about it as we are. The Morrisons represent a new generation of Route 66 motel owners, people who came to the highway as outsiders, fell in love with it, and dedicated themselves to preservation. They bring new energy and perspectives, but they also honor the traditions established by earlier generations of owners. Travel writer Marcus Johnson has driven Route 66 11 times over the past 20 years, staying at different motels each time. His experiences illustrate how diverse the Route 66 motel experience can be. Some motels are immaculate, beautifully restored, like stepping into the past, but with all the modern comforts, Marcus explains. Others are more authentic, which is a polite way of saying they're pretty rough around the edges. But even the rough ones usually have something special, some detail that makes them worth the stay. Marcus's favorite motel experience was at a tiny, family-run establishment in Oklahoma. It wasn't fancy. The room was small, the furniture was old, the bathroom fixtures were probably original from 1950. But the owner, this elderly woman, she made me feel so welcome. She gave me recommendations for where to eat, showed me photos of what the motel looked like in its heyday, told me stories about guests she remembered from 50 years ago. That night, that connection with her, it made the whole trip worthwhile. But Marcus has also had less pleasant experiences. I've stayed at motels that were just depressing, neglected, dirty, owned by people who clearly didn't care anymore. And I understand why. When you're barely scraping by, when you can't afford proper maintenance, it's hard to keep caring. But it's sad to see. These places deserve better. For travelers like Marcus, Route 66 motels offer something that chain hotels simply can't provide: authenticity, character, connection to place, and history. Even the imperfect experiences, the rooms that are a bit shabby or outdated, are part of the authentic Route 66 experience. Sarah and David Kim, newlyweds from South Korea, represent the international fascination with Route 66. They honeymooned on the Mother Road in 2019, an experience they've been planning for years. In Korea, Route 66 is very famous. Sarah explains through an interpreter. We see it in movies, in music. It represents American freedom, American adventure. For our honeymoon, we wanted to experience that. They spent 3 weeks driving from Chicago to Los Angeles, staying at vintage motels whenever possible. The Wigwam Village in Holbrook was a highlight. Sleeping in the teepee, it was like a dream, David says. Something we never imagined we could do. We took so many photos, and when we posted them online, our friends couldn't believe it. The Kim story illustrates something important. Route 66 has become an international icon, drawing travelers from around the world. For many international visitors, experiencing Route 66 is a bucket list item, a chance to touch a piece of American mythology made real. These personal stories, multiplied thousands of times, are the real history of Route 66 motels. Behind every neon sign, behind every vacancy or no vacancy notice, Behind every freshly made bed, there were human stories, moments of connection, experiences that shaped lives. The motels were witnesses to all of it. First kisses in parking lots, arguments that ended marriages, lonely nights for traveling salesmen, excited children on family vacations, elderly couples making one last trip together, aspiring musicians heading to Los Angeles to chase dreams, families fleeing poverty, hoping to find better lives in California. All of it happened in these modest roadside establishments, and something of all those human experiences lingers in the rooms, the courtyards, the very fabric of the buildings. When you stay at a historic Route 66 motel, you're not just sleeping in a room. You're connecting with decades of human experience, becoming part of a story that's been unfolding since these motels first opened their doors. Part 8. The Future of Route 66 Motels. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the surviving Route 66 motels face both opportunities and challenges. The preservation movement has saved many establishments from demolition, and Route 66 tourism continues to grow, providing a stable customer base. But questions remain about how to preserve these properties for future generations while keeping them economically viable and relevant. One of the biggest challenges is balancing authenticity with modern expectations. Travelers who seek out historic motels want an authentic experience. Vintage decor, period-appropriate furnishings, the sense of stepping back in time. But they also expect modern amenities, reliable Wi-Fi, comfortable mattresses, updated bathrooms with good water pressure and hot water. Motel owners must navigate this tension carefully. Install too many modern amenities, and you risk losing the vintage character that makes the property special. Maintain too much authenticity, and guests might be uncomfortable or dissatisfied. Different motels have found different balance points. The Blue Swallow has pursued maximum authenticity in common areas and exterior appearance while discreetly modernizing guest room interiors. Rooms feature period furniture and decor, but mattresses are new and comfortable. Bathrooms have been updated, and modern conveniences like Wi-Fi and flat-screen TVs are provided, but designed to blend in rather than dominate. Other motels have taken more aggressive modernization approaches, keeping only the exterior vintage character while completely renovating interiors with contemporary furnishings and amenities. This approach can be economically successful, attracting guests who want the Route 66 experience but prioritize comfort over authenticity. There's no right answer. Different approaches work for different properties and different markets. What matters is that decisions are made thoughtfully, with respect for the property's history and an understanding of what makes it significant. Funding remains a perpetual challenge. Maintaining historic buildings is expensive. Systems need constant attention. Roofs need replacing. Plumbing and electrical systems, often original or decades old, require specialized expertise to maintain and repair. Neon signs need regular maintenance and occasional restoration. Paint fades and must be refreshed. Swimming pools, those beloved features from the motor court era, are expensive to maintain and operate. Most Route 66 motels are small businesses without large cash reserves. Major repairs or renovations can threaten their survival. Some have successfully sought grants from preservation organizations or government programs. Others have crowd-funded repairs through online platforms, appealing directly to Route 66 enthusiasts who want to help preserve these establishments. The challenge is compounded by the seasonal nature of Route 66 tourism. Summer is peak season, when motels can operate near capacity and charge higher rates. But winter, especially in northern sections of the route, can be very slow. Motels need to generate enough revenue during busy months to carry them through slow periods. Some motels have found creative ways to extend their season or diversify revenue. They host events, car shows, motorcycle rallies, preservation conferences. They rent their properties for photo shoots or filming. They develop relationships with tour companies that bring groups through Route 66. They market to locals for special occasions, positioning themselves as nostalgic date night or anniversary destinations. Technology has been both blessing and curse for Route 66 motels. Online booking platforms like Booking.com and Airbnb have made it easier for travelers to find and reserve rooms at independent motels. Social media allows motels to market themselves directly to potential guests around the world. Review sites like TripAdvisor and Google provide feedback and help maintain standards. But technology also brings challenges. Maintaining an online presence requires time and skills that elderly motel owners may not have. Commission fees to booking platforms cut into already thin margins. Negative online reviews, whether fair or not, can damage business. And the expectation of instant, 24/7 online communication can be burdensome for small, family-run operations. Succession planning is another growing concern. Many Route 66 motels are owned by people in their 60s, 70s, or even 80s who have operated their properties for decades. What happens when they're ready to retire? Finding buyers who will preserve the property's historic character isn't easy. Families of longtime owners often don't want to continue the business, preferring different careers and lifestyles. Some preservation-minded entrepreneurs, like Jennifer and Tom Morrison mentioned earlier, are seeking out historic motels to purchase and restore. But there aren't enough such buyers to save every property. Organizations like the National Trust for Historic Preservation have explored various models to help transfer ownership of historic motels to preservation-committed new owners, but this remains an ongoing challenge. Climate change presents emerging challenges. Increased frequency of severe weather events, droughts, floods, wildfires threatens Route 66 properties, particularly in vulnerable regions. Rising temperatures increase cooling costs. Water scarcity in the Southwest, where many iconic Route 66 motels are located, raises long-term sustainability questions. Despite these challenges, there are reasons for optimism. Route 66 tourism continues to grow. International visitors, particularly from Europe and Asia, represent an increasingly important market. Domestic travelers, especially millennials and Gen Z, show strong interest in authentic, historically significant experiences rather than standardized chain hotel stays. Media attention continues to boost awareness. The success of films like Cars introduced Route 66 to new generations. Documentary series and travel shows feature Route 66 regularly. Social media influencers with large followings share their Route 66 experiences, inspiring their audiences to make similar journeys. Preservation organizations have become more sophisticated and effective. State Route 66 associations provide networking and support for businesses along the route. The national preservation community has embraced Route 66 as an important piece of American heritage worth protecting. Academic historians and preservationists increasingly study and document Route 66, ensuring its history is recorded and understood. Some communities have successfully rebuilt their economies around Route 66 heritage tourism. Seligman, Arizona, transformed itself from a dying town into a thriving tourist destination by embracing its Route 66 identity. Williams, Arizona, markets itself as the gateway to the Grand Canyon, but also heavily promotes its Route 66 heritage. Tucumcari, New Mexico, has made Route 66 central to its identity, with excellent signage, restored neon, and active promotion of its historic motels. New models for preservation and operation are emerging. Some motels have become mixed-use properties, combining lodging with restaurants, shops, or event spaces. El Vado Motel in Albuquerque reopened after extensive restoration as a mixed-use development with motel rooms, restaurant, bar, and small commercial spaces, a model that provides multiple revenue streams while preserving the historic property. Education is increasingly recognized as crucial. Museums dedicated to Route 66 in multiple states teach visitors about the road's history and significance. Interpretive signage along the route provides context. Preservation organizations offer workshops teaching property owners how to maintain historic buildings. This educational work ensures that appreciation for Route 66 extends beyond nostalgia to genuine understanding of its historical and cultural importance. The younger generation of motel owners and preservationists brings new energy and perspectives. They understand social media and digital marketing. They're comfortable with sustainable practices and adaptive reuse. They value authenticity and history, but aren't afraid to innovate where appropriate. They're building networks and communities around Route 66 preservation, creating support systems that didn't exist for earlier generations. Looking ahead, the future of Route 66 motels likely involves continued diversification. Some will remain traditional motels, carefully preserved time capsules offering vintage experiences. Others will evolve into boutique hotels, upscale properties that honor their historic character while providing luxury amenities. Still others might become event spaces, museums, or mixed-use developments. What seems clear is that Route 66 motels will continue to have a place in American culture. The hunger for authentic experiences, for connections to history, for alternatives to standardized corporate hospitality, all of these trends favor the survival of these unique properties. Every night, somewhere along Route 66, a neon sign flickers to life as the sun sets. A family pulls into a motor court parking lot, excited to be staying somewhere special. A motel owner greets them personally, welcomes them, makes them feel at home. And for one more night, the tradition continues. The story adds another chapter. The heritage of the Mother Road lives on. The motels glow at night, and as long as they do, Route 66 itself continues to glow in American consciousness, a reminder of who we were, a promise of experiences still available, a beacon guiding us toward authentic connection in an increasingly homogenized world. And so, dear travelers, we've reached the end of tonight's journey down Route 66. We've explored the birth of the Mother Road, traced the rise of motor courts and motels that lined it, celebrated the survivors like the Blue Swallow and the Wigwam villages, contemplated the mysteries and ghosts that haunt these old establishments, mourned the decline brought by the interstate era, celebrated the preservation revival, marveled at the neon artistry. Listen to personal stories from those whose lives touched Route 66, and look toward the future of these remarkable properties. But more than anything, we've tried to capture what these motels mean, not just as buildings or businesses, but as repositories of American experience, as witnesses to the dreams and disappointments, adventures and tragedies, hopes and heartbreaks of millions of travelers over nearly a century. The motels of Route 66 are more than historic artifacts. They're living connections to a way of life that valued the journey as much as the destination, that found magic in the open road, that believe in the possibility of transformation through travel. They remind us that America is more than its coastal cities and interstate corridors. It's also the small towns and wide spaces in between, places where human-scale communities persist, where personal connections still matter, where history isn't abstract but tangibly present in buildings you can touch and rooms you can sleep in. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine yourself on Route 66. Feel the desert heat giving way to evening cool. See the sky turning from blue to purple to deep indigo. Watch as the first stars appear, and then, one by one, the neon signs begin to glow. Blue swallows and red arrows, teepees and wagon wheels, cowboys and cacti, all those glorious beacons of light promising rest and welcome. Imagine pulling into a motor corps parking lot, the gravel crunching under your tires. The office door opens, and the owner steps out, friendly and welcoming, ready to show you to your room. You carry your suitcase across the courtyard, unlock the door, step inside. The room is small but clean, simply furnished but comfortable. You set down your bag, look around, and feel a sense of peace. You've arrived. You're here. For tonight, this room is home. Outside, other travelers are arriving, pulling into parking spaces, unloading cars, settling in. Children's laughter echoes from the swimming pool. Adults sit in lawn chairs, enjoying the cooling evening, perhaps chatting with neighbors. The neon sign casts its gentle glow over everything, and you realize you're part of something larger than yourself, part of a tradition that stretches back decades, part of a community of travelers all seeking the same thing: connection, experience, authentic engagement with the American road. Route 66 still exists, not as an official highway, but as something more valuable, as an idea, as a possibility, as an invitation to see America differently. The motels are the guardians of that invitation. As long as they stand, as long as their signs glow at night, as long as they welcome travelers, Route 66 lives. Tomorrow, if you choose, you could start planning your own Route 66 journey. You could map a route, make reservations at vintage motels, prepare to experience firsthand what we've been talking about tonight. Or you could simply let these stories and images float in your mind, becoming part of your dreams, enriching your sense of what America is and what it means to travel through it. The motels will still be there, waiting. The neon will still glow. The doors will still be open. Route 66, the Mother Road, America's Main Street, still beckons to anyone with a car and a sense of adventure. Anyone who wants to slow down, see more, connect with history and with fellow travelers. Sleep well, my dear friends. Dream of open roads and endless horizons. Neon lights glowing in the darkness. Small-town hospitality and the beauty of the boundless sky. Motels still standing guard along Route 66, continuing to light the way for us all. And if these stories touched you, if you enjoyed this journey along the main road, please consider subscribing to Mystic Sleep Tales and turning on notifications so you never miss our exploration of the mysteries of history and forgotten wonders. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is or in the world. We are happy to hear from our global community of curious souls. And please share with us any other mystical stories, historical mysteries, or forgotten places you'd like us to explore. Your suggestions illuminate our path, helping us discover and share the hidden wonders that make our world so infinitely fascinating. Until next time, may your journeys be safe, your sleep deep, and may you always find a pleasant light shining in the darkness when you need it most. Motels glow at night. Memories glow at night. Route 66 glows at night. And now, dear travelers, it's time to rest. Remember, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. Good night. Good night. Good night.